time for the Longines Chronoscope, a television journal of the important issues of the hour, brought to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. A presentation of the Longines Whitnor Watch Company, maker of Longines, the world's most honored watch, and Whitnor, distinguished companion to the world-honored Longines. Good evening. This is Frank Knight. May I introduce our co-editors for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope? Mr. William Bradford Huey, editor of the American Mercury, and Mr. Donald I. Rogers, an editor of the New York Herald Tribune. Our distinguished guest for this evening is Mr. Robert Morris, special counsel for the Internal Security Subcommittee. The opinions expressed are necessarily those of the speakers.
Mr. Morris, I believe that you have been counsel for what is generally known as the McCarran Committee. Is that correct, sir?
That's right, Mr. Huey.
For 17 months, you've been engaged in an important investigation. Is that correct?
Well, Mr. Huey, the investigation that we have been carrying on has been an investigation of the Institute of Pacific Relations and the effect that that organization was able to have on the foreign policy of the United States with respect to Far Eastern matters.
To identify this Institute of Pacific Relations, sir, this is a communist front organization, is it not?
Well, I think that the thing to do, the way to answer that, Mr. Rogers, is to say that the Institute of Pacific Relations was set up as a scholarly research organization. It was international in character, and as I say, it was set up for the professed purpose of specializing in research and study. According to the evidence, after the committee held hearings, open hearings since last July, examining thousands of documents, introducing many of those documents into the record, the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee and the Senate Judiciary Committee held that the Institute of Pacific Relations has not maintained the character of an objective, scholarly, and research organization.
In this lack of objectivity, in what direction did the IPR lean?
Well, the Judiciary Committee this afternoon reported that a small corps of officials and staff members carried out the main burden of IPR activities and directed its administration and policies in a communist and pro-communist direction.
Now, that report this afternoon has resulted in recommendations for the indictment of Owen Lattimore, has it not?
Well, that's not quite true, Mr. Rogers, not quite precise. The committee held this afternoon that Owen Lattimore testified falsely before the subcommittee with reference to at least 5 separate matters that were relevant to the inquiry and substantial in import. And on the basis of that conclusion of untruthful testimony, it asked the Department of Justice turn over to a grand jury the question of whether or not Owen Lattimore did commit perjury.
Yes.
Now, the important thing is this, sir. After 17 months of hard work and listening to 66 witnesses, you have released to the American people tonight the report of your committee. Is that correct, sir?
That's right. Senator McCarran filed it with the Senate this afternoon.
And this is it a unanimous report?
It was unanimous with respect to the conclusions of the Internal Security Subcommittee, and it was unanimously cleared by the Senate Judiciary Committee.
And you're telling our viewers, of course, have heard a great deal of argument in the last few years concerning one Professor Lattimore and certain people who were pro-communist. Now, you're saying that your committee has issued a unanimous report. Both Democrats and Republicans have subscribed to this report. Is that correct, sir?
That's right.
You have 13 members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and this is a unanimous report of that committee.
Well, it was unanimous with respect to the 7 members of the Internal Security Subcommittee, and then when the Senate Judiciary Committee met, there were no negative votes on that.
Oh, now, and these are the recommendations that you are making to our viewers and that you've made to the people of the United States. Number 1, that some action, grand jury action, be taken against Professor Lattimore.
That is correct.
I see. Now, you mentioned a man named John Peyton Davies, Jr.
Well,
Will you identify him for our viewers?
Well, John Peyton Davies is presently the Deputy Political Advisor to the United States High Commissioner in Germany. He was in 1949 a member of the top planning staff of the State Department. The committee took testimony in connection with a recommendation that he made in 1949 to two CIA agents that 6 people be employed and utilized by the CIA to give guidance and to consult with and to give direction to a certain project that CIA had in mind at that time.
Now that CIA, you're saying that a man who is currently an important figure in our government recommended that our Central Intelligence Agency hire at least 4 communists. Is that correct?
Yes, of the 6 people, 4 of them, according to the testimony and the evidence in our record, had communist connections, and 3 had been expressly identified as members of the Communist Party.
Now, what is Professor Lattimore's present activity?
Well, he's director of the Walter Hines Page School of International Relations at Johns Hopkins University.
All right, Dr. Lattimore is now a professor at Johns Hopkins.
He's a director.
And Mr. Davies is a high official in our government in Germany.
That's correct.
And you have recommended grand jury action against both of these men.
We have asked, the Senate Judiciary Committee asked that the Department of Justice turn the matter over to a grand jury for them to determine whether or not those 2 gentlemen committed perjury.
How about these other names that we see in the news as you have investigated? How about, for instance, Mr. Barnes, Mr. Joseph Barnes?
Well, Joseph Barnes came into the investigation only indirectly. It's true that he was the secretary of the American Council in 1934, but he then directed most of his activities outside of the Institute.
What is he doing now?
Well, I understand he's the executive vice president of Simon & Schuster. I think that's his name.
How about Freddie Vanderbilt Field?
Well, Frederick Vanderbilt Field succeeded Mr. Barnes as secretary of the American Council of the Institute of Pacific Relations in 1934 and held that position until 1940. He was, from 1940 until 1947, he was very active in the Institute. In fact, even after 1947, he was the custodian and the repository of the Institute of Pacific Relations old files. They were in his basement up until very recently.
Now, did you find evidence that some of these men who are now high officials of our government, that they dealt directly with Russian agents?
Oh, yes, the record is replete with such things, Mr. Ewing.
Now, you mentioned a man named Vladimir Rogov.
Well, Vladimir Rogov is, according to the evidence before the subcommittee, is an important intelligence agent, Soviet intelligence agent who operated in China. In fact, in 1943, it was his article in War in the Working Class that appeared that signalized a change in attitude on the part of the whole Soviet organization toward China. And we find that Vladimir Rogov, when he came into the United States just 1 year later, in January 1944, did come to the IPR office, did meet the then Secretary General Edward C. Carter, who sent him down to Washington to meet high IPR officials and to meet policymakers in Washington.
Now, sir, to make this clear to our viewers, is this what you found? Did you find that this Institute of Pacific Relations, and there were many good Americans
yes,
that belonged
indeed.
to it,
Well, we
were
can't
not?
stress that enough, Mr. Ewing.
There were many people who joined it who didn't know what it was really doing.
That's
Is that
right.
correct?
The committee found that most members and most trustees were not aware of what the inner core of the organization was doing.
But you did find that this inner core was, in effect, an instrument of Soviet policy between the years of 1941 on down, at least to 1949.
That is substantially the finding of the committee today, Mr. Ewing.
That it attempted to did it attempt to present false information to the American people?
That's right. The committee found substantially that it presented information that was slanted in the communist direction throughout the years.
Now, has there been evidence that the influence of this committee has seriously affected our foreign policy, our Far Eastern policy?
Yes.
The official policy of the United States government has been affected by the Institute of Pacific Relations.
That is right, Mr. Rogers. I'll mention a few of the findings of the Senate Judiciary Committee today. A group of persons operating within and about the Institute of Pacific Relations exerted a substantial influence on the United States Far Eastern policy. The IPR was a vehicle used by the communists to orientate American Far Eastern policies toward communist objectives. A group of persons associated with the IPR attempted between 1941 and 1945 to change United States policy so as to accommodate communist ends and to set the stage for a major United States policy change favorable to the Soviet Union in 1945.
Well, now, Mr. Morris, was there evidence, this is important for our viewers before the close of our show, is there evidence that members of the IPR actually collaborated with members of Soviet intelligence?
Yes, in addition to the Rogoff incident, and by the way, when Mr. Carter sent Rogoff to Washington, he selected Lachlan Curry and Alger Hiss as the two government people who should guide Mr. Rogoff when he was in Washington. In addition, we had a conference in 1941 during the Hitler-Stalin and the Russo-Japanese Pact, wherein Owen Lattimore was appointed on the recommendation of the President to be an advisor to Chiang Kai-shek in China.
Now, there's just one final question, sir. Can our members of our audience, our viewers, get copies of this important report?
Yes, the reports will be available tomorrow, I believe, possibly the next day, and they can be obtained through the government printing office in Washington.
Well, thank you very much for being with us tonight, sir.
It's a pleasure to be here, Mr. Hill.
The editorial board for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope was Mr. William Bradford Huey and Mr. Donald I. Rogers. Our distinguished guest was Mr. Robert Morris, Special Counsel for the Internal Security Subcommittee. Now, many persons have special requirements in their watches, and it's always been the policy of Longines to produce watches to serve every possible need. Here are a few examples. Servicemen, sportsmen, yachtsmen, and others look for a moisture-proof watch of really fine quality and superior performance. Here is one such, made by Longines. This, by the way, is the only watch that kept going throughout the 23-day ordeal of the Rickenbacker adventure on the raft in the Pacific. If you're a pilot, or do some amateur sports timing, or if you make scientific time studies, this Longines strap chronograph is the watch that's made to order for you. Another interesting technical watch is this one, which we call the Longines split-second chronograph. A watch, by the way, adaptable to a host of very difficult timing problems. And not to forget the ladies. There are beautiful and serviceable models for doctors, nurses, or sportswomen, of which these are examples. Actually, Longines Whitnor makes fine watches in the largest variety of styles and types of any watch company in the world. Your authorized Longines Whitnor jeweler is qualified to advise you on the best type of watch for your use. In all probability, he can show you just the watch you need, but if not, he can call on the factory for the type and style of watch that you require. And remember that you may buy and own, or buy and proudly give, a Longines watch for as little as $71.50. Longines, the world's most honored watch. Premier product of the Longines Whitnor Watch Company. Since 1866, maker of watches of the highest character. We invite you to join us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evening at this same time for the Longines Chronoscope, a television journal of the important issues of the hour, broadcast on behalf of Longines, the world's most honored watch, and Whitnor, distinguished companion to the world-honored Longines. This is Frank Knight, reminding you that Longines and Whitnor watches are sold and serviced from coast to coast by more than 4,000 leading jewelers, who proudly display this emblem, Agency for Longines Whitnor Watches.
Tune in the conventions on the CBS television network.